In a courtroom where power speaks louder than fairness, a young black man enters, quiet but confident. The judge chuckles, mocking his appearance, doubting his ability. The audience smirks. But what they don't know, this man isn't here to lose. He's here to rewrite every assumption. This is not just a legal battle. It's a story of brilliance, bias, and a comeback no one saw coming. It was just another routine case for Judge Holbrook. He sat high on the bench, flipping through papers with an air of boredom. The room buzzed with low chatter as the bailiff called out the next name, Malik Thomas. Heads turned. A young black man, dressed modestly but neatly, walked forward. Some in the room raised eyebrows. The judge let out a faint laugh. "You representing yourself?" he asked sarcastically. Malik nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." A few people chuckled. But Malik didn't flinch. He stood tall, calm, and collected, his eyes focused. He wasn't here to entertain. He was here to make history. White heavy check mark session 2. The courtroom wasn't used to seeing someone like Malik. Young, black, alone. No expensive lawyer, no flashy suit. Just quiet confidence. The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. "I hope you know what you're doing," he said, shaking his head. Malik's response was simple. "I do, Your Honor." The prosecutor smirked. This was going to be easy, or so he thought. Malik walked to the defense table, opened a worn leather folder, and began organizing documents. His hands moved with precision. The courtroom watched in silence, not out of respect, but doubt. They didn't expect a show. But they were about to get one. White heavy check mark session 3. State versus Malik Thomas, the clerk announced. The charges were serious: malicious damage to property, resisting arrest, and disturbing the peace. The prosecutor read them off with an arrogant tone, as if the verdict was already decided. But Malik didn't blink. "Objection," he said firmly. The room stirred. "On what grounds?" the judge asked, a hint of mockery in his voice. Malik stood, referencing a legal statute with clarity and ease. The room shifted. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Proceed." It was subtle, but the air had changed. Malik wasn't just some defendant. He knew the law. And he wasn't here to play defense. He was here to take control. White heavy check mark session 4. Malik began cross-examining the first witness, a police officer who claimed Malik had lunged at him. "Officer," Malik began calmly, "how far were you from me when I supposedly lunged?" The officer hesitated. "Maybe 5 feet. "Interesting," Malik replied. "And would you say you felt physically threatened from 5 feet away, while you were holding a weapon?" The officer shifted. I mean, it happened fast." "No further questions," Malik said, turning back. People in the gallery leaned in. He was cutting holes in their narrative, one question at a time. The judge cleared his throat, suddenly a bit more alert than before. White heavy check mark session 5. Next came a surveillance video. The prosecution played it with confidence, expecting it to seal the case. But Malik watched closely, taking mental notes. "Pause," he said suddenly, pointing to a frame. "Right there." He asked the judge to zoom in. "Do you see my hands raised?" The judge leaned forward. The video clearly showed Malik with both hands in the air. "Does this look like someone resisting?" he asked. The courtroom was quiet. The judge blinked. "Continue," he muttered. The prosecutor looked uneasy now. Malik wasn't just defending himself. He was teaching them how to see what they refused to. White heavy check mark session 6. The prosecutor tried to regain control, throwing out legal jargon to intimidate. But Malik wasn't fazed. "With respect," he said, "you're misquoting the statute." He pulled out the printed law, placed it on the evidence screen, and read it aloud. Line by line. Word by word. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the judge leaned in. For the first time, Malik wasn't just seen, he was heard. No shouting. No arrogance. Just truth. Delivered with calm authority. The bailiff, who had chuckled earlier, now watched with respect. Something was shifting. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. White heavy check mark session 7. The judge, trying to test him, asked Malik about a precedent, an old case few knew offhand. Malik nodded. Yes, Your Honor. People versus Westland, 1982. In that ruling, the court held, and he explained it, citing page and detail. The judge was stunned. That's correct, he said, slowly. The courtroom froze. A defendant just corrected the prosecutor and impressed the judge, in the same breath. Malik didn't smile. He just kept going. Because he knew, this wasn't about ego. This was about proving that intelligence has no color, and that justice, if it exists, must be earned by more than appearances. White heavy check mark session 8. Malik called his final witness, an elderly woman who had recorded the incident on her phone. She was nervous, but Malik spoke gently, guiding her with kindness. Ms. Harper, what did you see that day? I saw them yelling at him, she said. He didn't fight. He just kept asking what he did wrong. Malik nodded. Did you ever see him touch the officers? No, she said. He didn't touch anyone. The prosecutor objected, hearsay. But the judge overruled. Let her finish, he said. Malik stood tall. With every word, he was dismantling the case. Not through anger, through truth and respect. White heavy check mark session 9. After the witness stepped down, Malik played her phone video. Raw, shaky, real. It showed the officers shouting, pushing, cuffing him, while he stood motionless. The gallery gasped. The prosecutor's face dropped. Malik let the video speak for itself. No theatrics. No drama. Just facts. The judge sat back in his chair, quiet now. The earlier sarcasm in his tone was gone. He looked at Malik differently. Not as a joke. Not as a defendant. But as someone who had done what few could, fight a broken system, unarmed, and still find strength. And the trial wasn't even over yet. White heavy check mark session 10. When court adjourned for the day, people lingered. Whispers filled the room. A few reporters started taking notes. Malik packed up slowly, quietly. He wasn't smiling. Just focused. Outside, a small group approached him. Where'd you study law? One asked. Malik paused. I didn't. I studied life. And the law was always part of it. They stared at him, part awe, part disbelief. He nodded politely and walked away. Because tomorrow, he'd return. Not to beg. Not to prove. But to finish what he started. And deep inside, even the judge knew, this wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning. Malik began cross-examining the first witness, a police officer who claimed Malik had lunged at him. Officer, Malik began calmly, how far were you from me when I supposedly lunged? The officer hesitated. Maybe 5 feet. Interesting, Malik replied. And would you say you felt physically threatened from 5 feet away, while you were holding a weapon? The officer shifted. I mean, it happened fast. No further questions, Malik said, turning back. People in the gallery leaned in. He was cutting holes in their narrative, one question at a time. The judge cleared his throat, suddenly a bit more alert than before. White heavy check mark session 5. Next came a surveillance video. The prosecution played it with confidence, expecting it to seal the case. But Malik watched closely, taking mental notes. Pause, he said suddenly, pointing to a frame. Right there. He asked the judge to zoom in. Do you see my hands raised? The judge leaned forward. The video clearly showed Malik with both hands in the air. Does this look like someone resisting? He asked. The courtroom was quiet. The judge blinked. Continue, he muttered. The prosecutor looked uneasy now. Malik wasn't just defending himself. He was teaching them how to see what they refused to. White heavy check mark session 6. The prosecutor tried to regain control, throwing out legal jargon to intimidate. But Malik wasn't fazed. With respect, he said, you're misquoting the statute. He pulled out the printed law, placed it on the evidence screen, and read it aloud. Line by line. Word by word. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the judge leaned in. For the first time, Malik wasn't just seen, He was heard. No shouting. No arrogance. Just truth. Delivered with calm authority. The bailiff, who had chuckled earlier, now watched with respect. Something was shifting. The courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The judge, trying to test him, asked Malik about a precedent, an old case few knew offhand. Malik nodded. Yes, Your Honor. People versus Westland, 1982. In that ruling, the court held, and he explained it, citing page and detail. The judge was stunned. That's correct, he said, slowly. The courtroom froze. A defendant just corrected the prosecutor and impressed the judge, in the same breath. Malik didn't smile. He just kept going. Because he knew, this wasn't about ego. This was about proving that intelligence has no color, and that justice, if it exists, must be earned by more than appearances. White heavy check mark Session 8. Malik called his final witness, an elderly woman who had recorded the incident on her phone. She was nervous, but Malik spoke gently, guiding her with kindness. Ms. Harper, what did you see that day? I saw them yelling at him, she said. He didn't fight. He just kept asking what he did wrong. Malik nodded. Did you ever see him touch the officers? No, she said. He didn't touch anyone. The prosecutor objected. Hearsay. But the judge overruled. Let her finish, he said. Malik stood tall. With every word, he was dismantling the case. Not through anger. Through truth and respect. White heavy check mark Session 9. After the witness stepped down, Malik played her phone video. Raw, shaky, real. It showed the officers shouting, pushing, cuffing him, while he stood motionless. The gallery gasped. The prosecutor's face dropped. Malik let the video speak for itself. No theatrics. No drama. Just facts. The judge sat back in his chair, quiet now. The earlier sarcasm in his tone was gone. He looked at Malik differently. Not as a joke. Not as a defendant. But as someone who had done what few could, fight a broken system, unarmed, and still find strength. And the trial wasn't even over yet. White heavy check mark Session 10. When court adjourned for the day, people lingered. Whispers filled the room. A few reporters started taking notes. Malik packed up slowly, quietly. He wasn't smiling. Just focused. Outside, a small group approached him. Where'd you study law? One asked. Malik paused. I didn't. I studied life. And the law was always part of it. They stared at him, part awe, part disbelief. He nodded politely and walked away. Because tomorrow, he'd return. Not to beg. Not to prove. But to finish what he started. And deep inside, even the judge knew, this wasn't just a case. It was a reckoning. White heavy check mark let me know to proceed with Sessions 11 to 20. You said, give me 5 sections. ChatGPT said, absolutely. Here's the next 5 sessions, Sessions 11 to 15, in the same natural, humanized tone, around 850 characters each, continuing the momentum of Malik's courtroom battle. White heavy check mark Session 11. The next morning, Malik walked into court early. He carried no briefcase, no entourage, just the same old folder and an unshakable calm. Judge Holbrook noticed him. No smirk this time. Just a curious stare. Malik sat down, reviewed his notes, and waited. When the prosecutor entered, his demeanor had changed too, less smug, more cautious. The clerk called court into session. The tension was thick. Today was about final arguments. Malik stood, took a breath, and began. Your Honor, I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here for truth. And today, I'm going to show you why the system got this one wrong. White heavy check mark Session 12. Malik moved with grace as he presented his defense. He referenced legal codes, matched them to video evidence, and pointed out every inconsistency in the police reports. It says I was aggressive, he said, but every witness said otherwise. The video says otherwise. Even the officer's story changed under pressure. The judge listened carefully now, scribbling notes instead of rolling eyes. The jury watched intently. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't reacting to how Malik looked. They were listening to what he was saying. And what he said was powerful, precise, devastating to the case against him. The prosecutor tried to strike back, bringing up Malik's past, a minor arrest from years ago. Malik didn't deny it. "Yes, I've made mistakes," he said honestly. "But none of them justify being falsely accused today. The law doesn't punish who I was, it judges who I am now." That line hit hard. Even some jurors nodded. The judge adjusted his glasses. Malik wasn't pretending to be perfect. He was proving he was human, capable of growth, learning, and dignity. And the more he spoke, the clearer it became. The courtroom had misjudged him before he'd ever said a word. Malik ended his argument with quiet strength. "I know I'm not what you expected when I walked in. But expectation isn't justice. Evidence is. And the evidence clears me." He looked directly at the jury, then at the judge. "So I ask for nothing more, and nothing less, than fairness." A pause followed. The courtroom was still. No rustling papers. No side conversations. Just silence. The kind that carries weight. The judge didn't say a word. He just nodded, almost respectfully. Malik returned to his seat, not proud, not boastful, just grounded. The work was done. Now, it was time to wait. Deliberations began. The jury left the room, and Malik sat alone. No lawyer to talk strategy with. Just his thoughts. Outside, a small crowd was forming. Word had spread. Reporters. Activists. Students. People drawn to the story of the man who stood alone, and held his ground. Inside, Judge Holbrook flipped through the case file again, slower this time. There was something in his expression, less arrogance, more reflection. Maybe even guilt. Because he remembered the smirk he gave Malik that first day. And now he wasn't so sure who really held the power in that courtroom. Hours passed. The jury was still out. Malik remained composed, but the weight of the moment was undeniable. Every second dragged. This wasn't just about his freedom, it was about his dignity. Outside the courtroom, a local news reporter went live. "A man with no formal legal training has left a courtroom in awe with his precise and powerful self-defense." The judge himself appears visibly shaken by the turn of events. Inside, the courtroom was calm, almost sacred. Malik closed his eyes, not to rest, but to pray. Whatever the outcome, he had stood his ground. And that meant everything. Finally, the jury returned. The room held its breath. Malik stood. The foreperson rose and handed the paper to the bailiff. "On the charge of malicious damage to property, not guilty." A pause. "On the charge of resisting arrest, not guilty." And finally, "On the charge of disturbing the peace, not guilty." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Malik closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling deeply. The judge stared at him, no laughter now, just silence. A defendant had walked in underestimated, and walked out vindicated. The courtroom had just witnessed something rare, justice, earned with brilliance and grace. After the verdict, Malik gathered his things, moving slowly, humbly. People reached out, shook his hand, asked for interviews, but he kept it simple. "Thank you," he'd say. No speeches. No revenge. Just quiet strength. The judge called out softly, "Mr. Thomas." Malik turned. For the first time, Holbrook stood from the bench. "You surprised us all today." Malik nodded. "Sometimes you have to, just to be seen." The judge didn't reply. He just watched him walk out. Because everyone in that room knew something had changed, not just in that trial, but in the way they'd view justice from now on. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Cameras flashed, microphones were pushed toward him, but Malik wasn't looking for fame. He paused only when a young boy tugged at his sleeve. "Were you really your own lawyer?" the boy asked, eyes wide. Malik smiled gently. "Yeah, I had to be." The boy beamed. "I want to be like you." For the first time all day, Malik's expression softened. That moment, that small exchange, meant more than any headline. He hadn't just defended himself. He had inspired someone else to believe they could do the same. And That was everything. Back home, Malik sat on the front steps, finally alone. No applause. No reporters. Just silence and peace. His mom stepped outside with a mug of tea, pride radiating from her face. "I always knew you had it in you," she whispered, handing him the cup. He looked up, eyes tired but warm. "I wasn't sure I did. Until today." She sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You reminded the world that we're more than what they see." Malik nodded. Because now, it wasn't just about winning. It was about being seen and being respected. The next morning, Malik woke up to something unexpected. His name trending online. Clips from the trial had gone viral. His cross-examinations, his closing statement, even his quiet stare at the judge. Comment sections were flooded with praise. "He's a genius. This man needs to be in law school. I'd vote for him tomorrow." Malik scrolled through in disbelief. Not long ago, people laughed at him. Today, they were learning from him. He wasn't looking for recognition, but it found him anyway. And deep down, he knew, this moment could be the beginning of something far bigger than just a courtroom win. Malik accepted the invitation. Days later, he stood before a packed auditorium at Harvard. Law students, professors, even retired judges in attendance. No podium. No script. Just Malik, speaking from the heart. "I didn't come here to impress you," he began. "I came to remind you that the law is a weapon, and who holds it matters." The room was silent, hanging on every word. He shared his story, not to shame the system, but to challenge it. "Justice isn't blind," he said. "Sometimes, it just needs to be taught how to see again." Thunderous applause followed. He had come full circle. After the talk, students lined up to speak with him. Not out of politeness, but out of awe. "Your story changed how I see this profession," one said. A professor added, "You reminded us why we studied law in the first place." Malik was overwhelmed, but grateful. He wasn't just seen now, he was respected. As he left the hall, one student ran up and handed him a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Inside was a note, "You are our generation's Atticus." "Thank you." Malik held the book for a moment, humbled. He never asked to be a hero. But sometimes, truth chooses you. Back in his hometown, things had changed too. Malik, once overlooked, was now being invited to speak at local schools, community centers, even police reform panels. He walked into rooms that once ignored him, and now, they leaned in to hear him. But Malik never let the praise cloud his purpose. "This isn't about me," he'd say. "It's about every person who's ever been silenced, dismissed, or misjudged." At a local high school, a student asked, "Weren't you scared?" Malik smiled gently. "Of course I was. But fear doesn't stop you, doubt does. And I never let them give me that." Meanwhile, Judge Holbrook watched from afar. A clip of Malik's Harvard speech had reached his inbox. He watched it twice. Then again. Something in him shifted. He remembered the smirk he gave Malik that first day, the arrogance, the dismissal. And now, he felt shame. That night, he opened an old notebook where he kept private reflections. On a fresh page, he wrote, "I laughed at a man I should have learned from. May I never mistake silence for ignorance again." It wasn't an apology to Malik. But it was a start. And even judges, it seemed, could evolve. One evening, Malik visited the courthouse, not as a defendant, but as a guest speaker. It was surreal walking through those same halls, this time greeted with handshakes instead of suspicion. A young clerk approached him nervously. "You don't know me," she said, "but I was there the day you won your case. I'll never forget it." Malik nodded, touched. He stood at the podium where he once stood alone, looked out at a crowd of legal professionals, and said, "This building almost broke me, but it also built me. And today, I'm here not to tear it down, but to make it better." The courthouse echoed with a different energy now. Malik's voice didn't just fill the room, it lingered in people's minds. After the event, an older attorney approached him quietly. "I've practiced law for 30 years, he said. "But today, I learned more from you in 30 minutes. Malik shook his hand with humility. He never sought to impress, only to awaken something. As he stepped outside, The same stairs he once climbed in fear now felt different under his feet. Lighter. Like every step forward was not just his, but for everyone who'd ever been laughed at and kept walking anyway. Malik began mentoring young people from his community, those who felt trapped, overlooked, or criminalized just for existing. He met with them weekly in a small library room, sharing his story and teaching them how to navigate a system not built for them. "They expect you to fail," he'd say. "So give them something they don't expect: truth, discipline, and fire." The room grew week by week. Some came for advice. Others came just to feel seen. Malik didn't just teach law, he taught belief. And in that quiet room, change began, not in policy, but in people. Soon, local universities began offering Malik honorary roles, guest lecturer, advisor, even a proposed scholarship in his name. He accepted, not for status, but for access. "If I can open one door for someone else, it's worth it," he said. At a public ceremony, he was handed a plaque engraved with the words, "For Redefining Justice." He held it for a second, thoughtful. Then he placed it down beside him. "Thank you," he said. "But I didn't redefine justice. I just reminded it who it was supposed to serve." The crowd stood. Some with cheers. Some with tears. But not everyone was clapping. Some critics called him lucky, said he exploited the system for attention. Malik heard it all, but stayed silent. Because he knew the truth didn't need defending, it needed living. And that's what he did. Quietly. Consistently. One afternoon, while reading in the same library he once studied in alone, a teenager sat beside him. "Mr. Thomas, do you think I can be like you?" Malik looked up, smiled gently, and replied, "No. I think you can be better." That's the thing about real change. It doesn't end with one man. It begins with many. 1 year later, the courtroom where it all began hosted a special event, Justice Through Reform. And the keynote speaker? Malik Thomas. As he took the stage, he looked around at the very room where he had once been laughed at. But this time, the laughter was gone. Replaced by hope, respect, and change. He spoke not with revenge, but with vision. "I don't want to just tell my story," he said. "I want to rewrite the next chapter, with all of you." And in that moment, Malik was no longer just a man who survived the system. He was helping rebuild it. After the event, Malik sat in the back row of the courtroom for a moment alone. The same spot he had once waited silently, unsure if anyone would ever take him seriously. Now, that silence felt different, no longer heavy with fear, but filled with purpose. Outside the courthouse, a mural had been painted across a nearby wall, Malik's face beside the words, "Dignity has no dress code. Brilliance has no color." He didn't ask for it. But when he saw it, something inside him stirred. Not pride, but responsibility. Because change wasn't about moments. It was about momentum. White heavy check mark. National attention followed. Podcasts, interviews, even a feature on a major streaming documentary series. The man who beat the system became a headline, but Malik pushed back. "I didn't beat the system," he said. "I exposed it. And now I'm working to rebuild it, with the same tools it tried to use against me." In every interview, he redirected the spotlight to bigger issues: racial bias, public defenders underfunded, laws written in language people can't understand. "Justice," he said, "shouldn't require a miracle. It should be expected." His voice was no longer an echo, it was a movement. White heavy check mark session 34. With the support of civil rights groups and legal foundations, Malik launched a non-profit, Pathway Justice Project. Its goal? Free legal education for underserved communities. Real tools. Real rights. Real power. "We don't need more pity," he told his team. "We need preparation." The launch event was filled with energy, young people hungry to learn, elders nodding in agreement. Malik didn't wear a suit. Just a hoodie and jeans, standing in front of a whiteboard, breaking down legal rights in plain language. Because he knew, the courtroom isn't where justice begins. It begins in the mind. Meanwhile, Malik's old case files were requested by a law school as case study material. Professors wanted to teach what their textbooks didn't: resilience, bias, and self-advocacy. When Malik visited the class, a student raised his hand nervously. "Do you think you'd have one, if you didn't know the law?" Malik paused. "No. But knowing the law wasn't enough either. I had to believe I was worth defending, even when no one else did." The room fell silent. Because that wasn't just legal advice, it was life advice. And it stuck with every student in that room. Back in his neighborhood, Malik was still the same. He shopped at the same store, walked the same sidewalks. But people looked at him differently now, not just with recognition, but with hope. One night, an elderly man stopped him outside the grocery store. "You gave us something," he said. "Not just pride. Permission to stand tall again." Malik thanked him quietly. That night, he sat alone, thinking about how far he'd come. He didn't want to be a celebrity. He wanted to be a bridge for every person who'd been judged before they even had a chance to speak. A surprising letter arrived one morning from Judge Holbrook. A handwritten note. "Mr. Thomas, I owe you an apology. Not for how the trial ended, but for how it began. I judged you before I heard you. And that mistake changed how I see every case now." Malik read it twice, then set it down. He didn't need the apology, but he appreciated the growth. Because true change doesn't come from humiliation. It comes from reflection. The same judge who once laughed at him was now learning from him. And in a quiet way, that was justice too. Years passed. Malik never stopped teaching, never stopped advocating. His non-profit expanded across cities. His story became part of training programs, high school curriculums, and legal documentaries. But to him, the most meaningful impact wasn't on the news. It was in a message he received one evening. "Because of you, I didn't give up. I stayed in school. I know my rights. Thank you." It was signed by a teen he had never met. And that was enough. Because Malik didn't just change laws. He changed lives, one belief, one voice, one person at a time. A national law conference invited him to give the closing speech. It was held in a grand hall, full of scholars, judges, and lawmakers. Malik stood at the podium and looked around. "Everyone here knows the law. But do we know the people the law fails?" He let the question hang. Because if we don't, our degrees mean nothing. Our power means nothing. Justice isn't a theory, it's a responsibility. The room was quiet, reflective. Malik had walked in as a guest, but he was leaving as a leader. Not appointed, not elected, but earned. That night, Malik walked home under the city lights. No cameras, no applause, just the cool air and the weight of his journey. He passed the courthouse where it all began. Stopped. Looked up at the building that once tried to bury him in doubt. He smiled, softly, peacefully, because it never buried him. It shaped him, and in return, he reshaped it. Not with anger, but with brilliance, with truth, with faith. Malik Thomas had once been laughed at in that courtroom. No. He had become the reason no one would laugh at another man like him again. Malik's story was now part of the fabric of legal reform. In schools, his trial was studied as a modern turning point. In bar associations, his name came up as an example of advocacy without a license, but not without legitimacy. Still, Malik never let recognition distract him from the mission. He continued hosting free legal literacy workshops in underserved neighborhoods. "They say knowledge is power," he told one group. "But only if you know how to use it." The room listened closely. Because they weren't just hearing a lecture. They were learning how to defend their own stories. One day, Malik received an email from the Office of Public Defense. They wanted to partner with his nonprofit to create a community-based legal aid program. It was a full-circle moment. "Years ago, I couldn't afford legal help," he replied. "Now I get to help build a future where no one has to go through that alone." The program launched months later, with Malik training volunteers, public defenders, and even ex-inmates. He taught them not just how to argue a case, but how to listen. Because sometimes justice doesn't need a louder voice. It just needs an honest one. White heavy check mark. A documentary film crew followed him for weeks, capturing his day-to-day life. No filters, no glamour. Just real work. The final cut premiered at a major film festival. As the credits rolled, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Malik watched from the back row, hands folded. He wasn't chasing fame, but he knew the power of visibility. "The more they see us," he said afterward, "the harder it is to ignore us." That film later won awards. But for Malik, the real reward came in the form of a letter from a young viewer: "You made me feel like I matter." Expanded into prisons, offering legal workshops to inmates preparing for re-entry. Many had never even understood the charges they were convicted under. "They trapped us in language," one said. Malik nodded. "Then we'll speak their language, and ours." Inside those gray walls, hope began to breathe again. Inmates who once felt powerless started asking questions, quoting statutes, and writing appeals. Malik watched quietly, often emotional. These were the forgotten ones. But now, they were remembering who they were, and learning who they could still become. In a surprise announcement, a law school created the Malik Thomas Fellowship, a scholarship for students committed to justice reform. Malik was invited to speak at the first award ceremony. The recipient, a young woman who had grown up in the same neighborhood Malik had once walked through in silence. "You paved this road for me," she said through tears. Malik didn't say much in reply. Just hugged her. Because sometimes the loudest victories aren't spoken, they're felt. And in that room full of rising leaders, he didn't see followers. He saw future fighters of justice. Years passed, and Malik remained grounded. He declined political offers. Turned down book deals that wanted to twist his narrative. "I'm not a brand," he said. "I'm a man who stood up when no one else would." But he did agree to write one thing, a free online guide called Know the System, Know Yourself. It was downloaded over 10 million times. Schools, prisons, shelters, everyone used it. It wasn't just law. It was life. And Malik made sure it stayed free. Because the truth should never be behind a paywall. One morning, Malik sat at his usual coffee shop when a father and son walked in. The father pointed at him, whispering to the boy. "That's him," he said. The boy walked over, nervously. "Mr. Thomas, I want to be like you." Malik smiled and knelt to eye level. "Don't be like me. Be better than me. Start now. Read everything. Question everything. And never let anyone tell you your voice doesn't count." The boy nodded slowly, eyes wide. For Malik, that was it. The work didn't live in headlines. It lived in moments like this. At a panel discussion, Malik was asked, "What do you want your legacy to be?" He paused, then replied, "That I was the man who reminded the world what justice could look like, when it listened." No applause. Just quiet reflection. Because his words weren't meant to dazzle. They were meant to dig deep. After the event, a judge approached him quietly. "You changed how I sit on the bench," she said. Malik nodded. That was enough. He didn't need a monument. He needed ripple effects. And he could feel them, moving through courts, classrooms, and conversations across the nation. On the anniversary of his trial victory, Malik stood once again outside that same courthouse. Not as a protester. Not as a speaker. Just a man remembering where it all began. He placed a single folded paper on the courthouse steps. It read, "To the next Malik, they might laugh. Let them. Just know, they laughed at me too. Until they couldn't." Then he walked away. Quietly. Because he knew, some stories echo louder after you stop speaking. And his had already traveled further than he ever imagined. The world knew his name now. But Malik never chased fame. He chased impact. He once entered a courtroom where no one believed in him. He left it having changed everyone in it. His journey was more than a legal victory. It was a mirror held up to justice itself. And in that mirror, the world saw the flaws, the cracks, and the power of one man who refused to be silenced. Malik Thomas didn't just win a case. He awakened a generation. And that story, whispered in courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms everywhere, will never be forgotten.